Good morning and welcome. We'll be starting here in a little over a minute once we get everybody on board. We'll give folks another 30 seconds or so to log in, and then we'll get started. Okay. And my wall clock's actually only behind by about 30 seconds. That's pretty good. Okay, here we go. Good morning, everybody. My name is David Orr. I'm the director here at the Cornell Local Roads Program, where your New York State LTAP Center. And welcome to the first of our summer series of our foundational webinars. Today we're going to be talking about alignment and intersections. I'll talk more about what we're up to here in just a couple of minutes. We will be taking polls, as you see, using polleverywhere.com. And there's also an app if you want to do these a lot. It can make it more convenient for you. If you haven't been on one of these webinars before, down at the bottom of your screen, you've got audio settings. You can use that. There is a chat feature. We do ask you to open that chat feature up because that's where we send you links. So you don't have to type out links in for the handouts and for other activities, though it is not a way for you to put stuff in. We disabled that feature. If you want to send us questions, use the Q&A feature, open that one up. In fact, I'll actually be using the Q&A feature throughout the webinar as well, in addition to the polls. And it may ask you to raise your hands now and then just to answer a quick yes, no kind of question. So keep that in mind. And here we go. A couple of reminders. This is worth one PDH, Professional Development Hour for engineers here in New York State. And we can only give it to the person who is registered. And while it doesn't make a difference anymore because they've changed some of the rules, it is still technically considered a course rather than an educational activity. And if you're from outside New York State, well, you'll need to check with your LTAP center. Today's webinar is fairly generic. I do have a few New York State specific things, but it is fairly generic if you're from outside New York State. Okay. Now, again, I said this is the first of our summer series. This is a list of all of our webinars from today with road alignment all the way to snow and ice in the middle of August. And as you can see, just over half of the 11 are worth professional development hour. Those are the ones with the asterisk on it. And if you're wondering about that, that is Eagle Cliff Falls over near Montour Falls. I went there last Friday and somewhere out wandering while being, no, it's Thursday, excuse me, playing hooky, I got myself a cold. So my weekend was spent thinking about this webinar. No, I didn't even do that. Welcome to everybody. There is a handout. Again, if you've opened up the chat pod, there's a link to that handout. If you don't have access to the box, and some agencies do not, just send us an email in the Q&A and we can get that emailed over to you. It has an outline of what we're talking about today. It has some references, which will be very useful later on. And then it also talks about our upcoming training. So the rest of the webinars, the fact that our fall workshops will be out in June, and the Bridge Conference that will be sometime this summer, probably in August. We'll set the dates on that here pretty soon. Okay, so keep that in mind. And that's a nice little way to remind you of what we talk about today. Now, we're going to do a couple of polls to help out, have a little bit of fun, and helps me figure out what case studies I'm going to do at the end of our hour together. So, who do you work for? Do you work for a town, a county, a city or village, state or federal, tribal, an MPO, an authority like the Thruway Authority, or even a soil and water conservation district, sort of a semi-governmental organization? Are you a private consultant? Are you a contractor? And if you work just for a living, that's okay. I see at least a couple of you are saying you work for a living. And that's cool too. I have no problem with that. Okay, so today we have about a quarter state or federal. We have about a quarter who are consultants, a few authorities, quite a few MPOs. Okay. Uh, some county folks and city and village. Okay, I think, yep. Okay. We're gonna It's going to help me. There's two more questions that'll help me figure out which case studies we're going to do at the end of our hour. Okay. What is your job? Are you an administrator? Are you the highway superintendent or DPW commissioner? Deputies, please use that box as well. If you're primarily an engineer or a planner, you need to know that. If you're in the field, are you a supervisor or a board member? Uh, you do whatever the boss tells you to do. And if you put none of the above, and that's an acceptable answer, just make sure you put in the Q&A what that means. And if you can't access the polls, please use the Q&A as well. I'll read them and look at them and make sure we get your answer included in there. And yes, I see at least one of you says you should do whatever the boss tells me to do. Yes, I know that feeling too. So quite a few engineers. Okay. And again, if you do none of the above, okay, we got a GIS specialist. Okay. And then where are you from? There's a picture here, should be a picture of New York State. You can click right on the map and we'll see where you're from in New York State. I'm assuming, but I don't want to make any presumptions, that more of you are in urban areas than rural areas. And it does appear that's mostly true, though I certainly see a few rural folks. And we have somebody who's from, looks like Pennsylvania, towards Pennsylvania, or Pittsburgh, excuse me. That's cool. Okay, that's good to know. Okay, very good. All over the state. I like that. Okay. And now, just because I'm going to have a little bit of fun this summer, at least in the webinars I do, and I may convince some of the others to do this, and we're going to have a fun question to end our welcome. I've got a few lined up, but we'll have fun. Today's fun question, because it is summer, sort of at the end of flower season, but what the heck? What is your favorite flower? Just again, this is totally for fun, just to break the day started, have a little bit of fun. We'll see what you guys come up with. Ooh, lilacs, lilacs taking the lead. Tulips, irises. My wife likes daisies, by the way. Makes it cheap for me. Though I can't bring them home because she's allergic to them. So, okay. Sunflowers and roses. That's not surprising with lilacs right behind. Okay. Again, we'll just have a little bit of fun. Thank you. Okay, now what we're talking about is alignment and intersections, but what we're really talking about is a continuation of the idea of the safe systems, which you have heard us talk about in our traffic safety webinars and in our workshops. And this is something that came from Federal Highway a little over a decade ago. And the idea is we used to do the 4 E's and we siloed everything. We really want to have a safe system. So yes, we care about the users. Yes, we care about the roads. Yes, we care about speeds and post-crash care and even the vehicles, but we don't want to silo any of these things. We don't want to go just look at enforcement or just look at education. We really want to look at all of these things. And hopefully by doing so, by not siloing it, we get a little bit of redundancy so that even if somebody isn't really behaving the right way, their vehicle's not in the best shape, and they're going too fast, the road can keep them from having a crash that changes their life. Okay. And we're really focused on are the crashes that are going to be fatal or of such severity that they change someone's life dramatically, long term. Okay. So keep that in mind as we talk about all of this stuff with intersections over the course of our hour together. Now, if we're talking about intersections and the alignment of roadways, especially around intersections, what do you think the goals then are of a good intersection? So in there, put in what you think the goals are. Like the flower thing, we're going to ask and create a Wordle or a cloud. Oh, that's right. I did this one with a list. I'm doing a Wordle later. Predictability. Yep, that actually can make a very safe intersection. Yeah, because people know what they are seeing when they get to the intersection. We don't want to break their expectations. Yeah, that's good. That's good. We want safety. Okay. Now, can we have a perfectly safe? No, there's no such thing as perfectly safe, but we certainly want that. We need to think about the level of service, especially if a lot of demand. Okay, that's very important. Okay. And that's why one of the things in my list is we want good flow, and the easy, safe movements also helps that. Okay. So capacity, you've already answered, safe, smooth flow. We'd really like things that are right angle. We'll come back to that right angle. Someone put in the Q&A. That's a good answer. Okay, that's important. What I don't see is one more thing I'm looking for. Let's see if it pops up. I'll give you about another 10 seconds. And it's something we don't always think about, and yet it's absolutely critical. And yes, signage is part of the equation. What I'm looking for, okay, and that's the next poll anyway. So I'll go ahead and start the next poll, and that is, who are the users? We need to think about all of the users of our roadway, our intersections especially. Okay. Yep, everybody says pedestrians, but let's be honest, most intersections are used by, there they are, cars. But we need to account for the cars, the bicyclists, pedestrians, schools, commercial vehicles, large trucks, small trucks, humans. We got to account for humans. Well, we may even have to account for pets and dogs. Okay. And of course, we also have people who might be having a mobility issues. Maybe they're using a cane. They happen to be in a wheelchair. Uh, they're pushing a cart. Okay. So there's lots and lots of things we have to account for. And a good intersection has to take into account, as thrown in the Q&A, everyone. Okay. So as you're thinking about the intersection, think about who is using it. And one of the things we recommend you always do when you're looking at intersections is start by doing an inventory. Now, this drawing here is in our class that we've got on roadway safety, which currently is called Solutions for Safer Roads and Streets. But it actually comes back all the way to the version that was done by Jim Markle, who's now with Albany County. In fact, I think he drew this one. I don't remember who drew it, but I think he did. He certainly got it drawn for the class. But do a simple inventory. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't even have to be super fancy, and it doesn't even have to be to scale. But draw yourself a quick inventory of your road system. Take some time. It's worth doing it because as soon as you do it, you quickly start to focus in and know, where are the problems? So if I get a road like this, and I'm going to change my ink color because I don't like red, and I'm going to do a color other than black. Let's try, we'll do a dark blue today. So just immediately you start seeing things. You can see this bridge here, right here. That's pretty good. It's got good rail systems. It's in good shape. No issues there probably. But here we got a sharp corner with a tree on the outside and a head wall with a box. We don't like those sticking up out of the roadway. And while we're talking mainly about alignment near intersections today, you can see other things while you're at it. And of course, if we're looking at the intersection, we have one of these famous Ys. We'll talk about why a Y is not a great thing today. Trees that might affect sight distance. Um, we might have issues dealing with uh, poles near the intersection. So you can start seeing your problems and start making a list of where you think you might have concerns. Now, of course, what percentage of crashes occur at intersections? Okay, so let's just pop a poll up and see what y'all think. There we go. What percentage of crashes occur at intersections? Is it 20, 30, 40, 50, or 60%? And again, these are national numbers. New York's numbers are actually slightly higher because we have a fairly large urban percentage in terms of traffic. And again, if you can't access the poll, feel free to put it in the Q&A. Okay, so I'll scroll down a little bit. And as you can see, most of you are saying 40 to 50. The folks who do it in the Q&A are in a similar ballpark. 40 to 50 is the most common. Yep. All crashes, property damage, injury, and even fatals, it is nationally about 40%. You're slightly higher than that. Okay. And is working on an intersection safety action plan. In fact, I need to get back with them now that highway school is done to see where that stands so we can help them with some things they want to do there. If you looked at only the fatals and serious injury crashes, the place where we tend to focus under the safe systems approach or safe system approach, it jumps up. It's above 50%. More than half of all crashes are either fatal or serious injury. And again, New York State tends to be slightly higher at intersections because we have a fairly high percentage of traffic that's actually going through intersections versus some other states. Okay, so keep that in mind. And by the way, I'll be nice to you. You won't have to remember this for your PDH. We'll do other things for your PDH this time. We're doing case studies. So you don't have to remember that. But it might be a number you write down in your sheet of paper later on to remind yourself why intersections are so important. Okay, what kind of crashes do we have at intersections? What do you think? What kind of crashes do we have at intersections? We can have a T-bone, sometimes called a crossing. Yep. Right angle. Yep. We can have rear end. Okay. Rear end crashes can be occurred because someone stopped. They can also be what's known as a diverging, where somebody's turning and somebody doesn't see them turn, they hit them. Okay. We can have side swipes. Yep. Overtaking is a form of side swipe. I'd like to see that. Somebody noted we also have crashes with pedestrians, bicyclists, other users, not just large vehicles. Okay. And so we have different types of crashes that we have to deal with. And so when we think about that, we have to think about the conflict points that occur. Okay. The Federal Highway Administration tends to put them into three different categories. Okay. So they think about different types of crashes. Okay. So let's just imagine you've got a vehicle, you're coming up the road from the bottom. Okay. We're trying something here today. So we're coming up the road from the bottom up here, right? You could have a diverging crash, okay, where the vehicle in front of you decides to turn and you don't see that vehicle turning, okay, so it's wanting to turn. See if I can get this to work here. There we go. That's not too bad. The vehicle wants to turn, you don't see it, and bing, we get a diverging crash because you wanted to go straight. They didn't. They were turning, they slowed down, you didn't catch it, you hit them. That's known as a diverging crash. And there are actually quite a few diverging crashes that occur at an intersection. Okay. You could also get a crash where you're continuing on through the intersection, you're doing just fine, right? Yeah, I'll make this line a little bit longer. Okay. And somebody coming in from the side, this time they don't see you. Okay. And when they hit, they call that a merging crash. Okay. Those are the least severe of the crashes that we get. Okay. Because they tend to be sideswipe, relatively low uh, energy collection. Okay. But they can still be pretty severe, especially if somebody's coming in really fast. Okay. And then, of course, the one that's really bad is as you're crossing that roadway, if somebody failed to see the stop sign or they failed to stop at the traffic light, if there was a traffic light where they hit there, now, and I'll use the same color the feds do, though I'll make it a little darker. That's a crossing crash or a T-bone. And those are some of the most severe crashes because of the speeds that we get. Okay. So different types. In fact, if I erase all the ink on the slide and I pull the whole figure up, you can see there are 32 vehicle collision points that exist. Okay. And a large percentage of them, okay, over half, are possible crossing T-bone high energy types of crashes. Okay. So when we think about crashes at intersections, even simple ones like this nice, just standard 4x4, you know, coming in, we need to think about those conflict points. And of course, someone mentioned the idea of the pedestrian and bicyclist. So let's not forget that. Let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about crosswalks. Now, of course, whether there's crosswalks marked or not, whether there's symbols there or not, there is a crosswalk at every intersection here in New York State. In this case, there is a crosswalk, and this picture actually comes from Connecticut. There's a bridge which has frogs on it. I don't know why, but I took the picture and I got rid of the crosswalks to show you the value of a good crosswalk. See? That crosswalk really pops. You can really see it, both for the driver and for the pedestrian. So we like crosswalks. But once we start introducing pedestrians and even bicyclists, we start adding additional conflict points because now we have a pedestrian who is walking down that roadway. Okay. So now going down the roadway, you've got a vehicle, and that vehicle might be going straight. Oh, let's change that color back to the black. That vehicle might be going straight. Okay. That vehicle might be turning. Okay. That vehicle might be coming across the roadway, all the way across. Anytime they cross that crosswalk, there could be a conflict. And again, we'll use the color that we hid for pedestrians. So you could have conflict here, both for the vehicle going straight and turning right. You could have the one coming across the intersection. Okay. And of course, what are people looking for? They may or may not be looking for that pedestrian. Okay. Now I'll get to the next slide. You can see We add in, now we have 24 additional possible conflicts with pedestrians in addition to the vehicle conflict points. And of course, part of the problem with that is when we're in a car, we look for cars. Now, I'm taking a risk here, but sometimes risks are worth it. I'm going to show a video. Going to watch the video. It's an awareness test. Okay. I'm going to be asking you to raise your hand at the end, well, about halfway through. So I'm going to ask you how many teams passes does the team in white make? You're going to throw that in the Q&A when it gets to the end, or just remember it. Just remember it. That's good enough. So keep counting the number of passes that go into passing the white team, the white team's passes. Okay. Now, again, you might miss one because of the internet and all that, but how many have you got? 13. If you did, that's great. More importantly, raise your hand if you saw the moonwalking bear. Raise your hand. A couple of you. Let's do that again. Now, do you see the bear? If you've not seen the video before, if you ever see it again, you'll not miss the bear. This is a PSA, an ad out of Great Britain from a bicyclist coalition. And it's reminding people to look for cyclists. We know that people don't see cyclists and motorcyclists because in the car, they look for cars. It's easy to miss the pedestrian, okay, because we're not focused on that. And so we have to keep that in mind, especially at intersections where we don't necessarily expect to have pedestrians, and even sometimes when we do. Now, I'm going to show you a video. I will tell you ahead of time, this particular video, the injury is only a broken arm. Do not ask me how it only is a broken arm, but it is only a broken arm. It also illustrates the reason that we can only do so much. A person was walking against the walk signal. They had a stop sign hand, and of course, someone went through a traffic light, and amazingly, only a broken arm. Again, I don't know how, thank goodness. But we want everybody to get home safely every single day. And when they come to intersections and speed, that can be risky because we know that if someone gets hit outside of a vehicle, if they're walking and they get hit by a car, their chances of walking away with just a minor injury and still even a broken arm is pretty serious, but that would be considered a non-A level injury. Their chances of doing that at 23 miles an hour are still not great. We're still talking about, a third of the time either being a fatality or a serious life-changing injury. Time you get up to 40, well, it's even worse. Now we're talking a 50-50 chance of a fatality and a 80 to 90% chance of a serious injury plus a fatality. And of course, at really high speeds, it's really just almost fatality every single time. At intersections, if we do our job right, we can get those speeds lower, but then it's not going to be as slow as you think. And especially you get high-speed roadways with intersections, we can get high-speed collisions. So we need to think about that. And that's why somebody had put in the Q&A, and some people put it into the rows, the cloud that we put together. We need to have consistency for everybody involved. We need to have good geometry when it comes to our intersections, okay? And sometimes we can get some weird intersections. We'll come back to this thing and see what y'all think we might do in a place like this. But let's talk about those geometric standards. Now, raise your hand if your agency has a set of geometric standards that you follow. Raise your hand. I don't care which one you follow, just raise your hand. Okay, if you're from a consulting firm, I hope I have a one that you're going to follow. Everybody should have a set of standards, okay? Because if you don't have a set of standards and something does happen, you can be taken to court and be asked to follow standards which may or may not be that applicable to you, okay? So not many of you are raising your hand. You should have a set of standards. Now, that standards might be the AASHTO Green Book. It might be the New York State Highway Design Manual, which, by the way, just is essentially the AASHTO Green Book with New York State specific modifications, which makes sense. Got to deal with snow. The AASHTO Green Book is written for the whole United States. There is an AASHTO low volume set of standards for about 2,000 vehicles or less per day, with another cutoff in the middle at about 400 vehicles per day. Those are standards which you could use even here in New York State. I did find out last week at the NYSLTAP meeting that the state DOT allows the use of these standards for very low volume roadways. And that's good. There are some limitations with these guides. The Little Green Book is sometimes called. but they might be useful. We actually developed a set of standards based upon the Astro Little Green Book, and actually it turns out standards that were developed here in New York State back in the 90s under the first Cuomo administration, and actually were used as part of the Little Green Book. Now, if you've got locally developed standards, that's okay. But remember, what's the default you're going back to? Do you have some engineering support behind that? So if your agency has a set of standards, you might want to check to make sure there's something you could support if you did get called into court on that. Now, when it comes to intersections, there's a lot more in these books than just some information about roadways and ramps and stuff like that. There's a bunch of stuff on intersections, but let's talk about sort of the 8 most common intersections. And we won't look at all of them, but we do want to just focus on a few. Obviously, we've got T intersections, we've got highly skewed T intersections, the infamous Y coming into a main road. We've also got true Y intersections. There's not a lot, but there are a few. I've seen a few. In fact, I've got a picture of one that will show that is a true one. The most common is, of course, the 4-way intersection, the 5 down the bottom. And then, of course, the highly skewed intersection. And someone had mentioned we'd really like to be at a right angle. And how much off of a right angle? Well, we'll talk about that. And of course, you could have multiple roads coming into it. It could be 5, could be 6 roads coming in. And then, of course, our friend, the roundabout / rotary. Okay, so let's talk about these a little bit. Let's start with the 4-leg intersection. Okay. Now, obviously, with a 4-leg intersection, we talked earlier about making sure we have all the road users available. So let's talk about those road users. Okay. Now, let's start with a car. Most intersections, we start by thinking about how's the car going to get around them, right? So if a car comes up to the roadway, it wants to make a right turn. Okay. As it goes around, it's going to end over on the right. So somewhere in the middle, it's going to have to be turning, and we could actually draw an outline of the track that the vehicle makes. It's not quite as narrow as the vehicle, but as long as the radius of the inside of that curve is good enough, we're good. We got a nice little intersection, okay? And so a lot of our intersections are based upon what happens with a car. But let's think about those other users for a second, okay? Now, that's the car. Let's think about what happens with a pedestrian. Pedestrian's going to want to cross across the roadway, right? So they're going to go straight in this particular case. Well, in that case, you could draw an outline for them. And when are they at risk? Well, they're at risk when they're in this zone between the two curbs, okay? What we'd really like for the pedestrian is the shortest possible distance between those two curbs, okay? And there's 3 or 4 ways we can think about doing that. Let me get a color that's not one we're using now. Let's see. I'm going to go with purple just because it shows up a little bit better than the green does. Obviously, you can't go too much narrower than the width of the roadway with the curbs, but you could put a bulb out. You could put a bulb out here, widen this out a little bit. Whoop, make that better there. And then the pedestrian can stand there. If you did it on both sides, well, then you'd have a shorter distance for the pedestrian, less risk. But then, of course, can the car get around the corner? Is there enough space? This is actually a fairly common thing. You can see this when they allow parking on the side of the road because there's still room for the vehicle to turn, but things like that could help, okay? And sometimes we tend to push the crosswalk away from the intersection to get through the narrowest portions, so we have the wider radius, but then we have the problem of, well, do pedestrians tend to want to go over to outside their straight line? No, they'd like to go straight. And then, of course, we have trucks, okay? And yeah, there's bike lane issues. You got to worry about them too. I'm just doing these 3 types of vehicles today, but yeah, we could spend a whole lot of time on bikes as well. Let's look at a truck. A truck is a very different animal in a lot of ways, especially if it's a semi-tractor or one with a trailer. So as it comes down the roadway and wants to wind up getting over to the right, well, if we don't account for it, its trailer tends to track behind it. There are turning templates for this, either electronic turning templates or the old-fashioned plastic ones. If you ever want, we have copies of the old plastic ones. They're actually fairly useful to look at. And we've actually used them on plans with people. They're pretty cool. But if you draw the line of the track for that, well, you may not have enough room. So if that truck needs to get around a corner with a tight radius, it's got only two choices. One choice, it can swing out early, get its front end way over here, and then swing over. And now it's maybe possibly in the lane for a vehicle going down. Or as it swings around, it goes up and comes back down. And now it's in the way of that vehicle. Okay. Now, if you're in a place where you get two semi-tractors a month, like a residential area, and there's very low traffic, that may not be that bad. But if you're in a place with a lot of traffic, it's something you have to account for. And this is part of what we're doing when we're thinking about design. We're trying to design for that. And of course, we have to have a longer distance and a higher radius, but that makes it harder for the pedestrian because now they have a longer distance to cross. Or we try to move that crosswalk away from the radius portion, and that may not work as well. Okay, so let's keep that in mind as we move forward. When it comes to the different vehicles, how do we account for that? And what is the driver? Um, that's why it's so important to get good traffic counts. And that traffic count should not just be cars. It should include trucks. It should include pedestrians, bicyclists, all the users. And then you have to rank what's the most critical thing. And that's why we have good standards. And that's why it's important to have good sets of standards available to you. Okay. Now, another thing we need to worry about is the sight distance at intersections. Now, here's one that's obviously a little short. Okay, it's pretty clear this isn't long enough. Let's just remind ourselves on sight distance what that means. Okay, sight distance is two parts. One is the perception reaction distance. That's the time from when you first see a problem until you actually put your foot on the brake. And then there's the actual stopping sight distance of the vehicle before it hits the fixed object. Okay, now, obviously, trucks have a longer stopping distance, though the perception reaction distance is actually relatively similar. Cars, shorter, motorcycles even shorter than that, but that perception reaction distance is pretty constant. And we typically use 2.5 seconds for them to react for an unknown something before they put their foot on the brake. If we do a good job with signage, we don't make it mixing their expectations up. People do react faster than that. And you can actually improve safety by not giving people weird information. Okay. Now, in the most current version of the Green Book, they've added something in called the decision sight distance. I like the decision sight distance concept, and what that says is because of all the distractions, because there may be something that's completely out of sorts, we're going to add a little bit additional time for people to react in urban settings and even a little bit in rural settings. We've added a little bit extra distance based upon the conditions, and especially intersections. This is fairly common. We know there's other distractions. So you add a little bit more distance in terms of when you decide whether or not you need to put a better signage or things like that. Okay, so if you haven't seen it before, it's in the most current version of the AASHTO Green Book, and it adds some distance. And again, if we had 2 hours, we'd talk more about those numbers are. But I do want you to think about that sight distance at an intersection. Okay, so we're just going to do the standard classic 4-lane crossing a major road off of a minor road, and we're going to assume there's no odd sight distance issues. But you need to be able to see enough to either cross in front of a vehicle coming to you, turn right in front of a vehicle so they don't have to slow down dramatically, or turn left in front of a vehicle so they don't have to turn dramatically. The most critical value, by the way, is typically the left turn / crossing maneuver. Okay, that's the most critical one in terms of distance for cars. Okay, for trucks, left turn is actually the worst. Okay, and again, you can do the math, and I did the math, just picked a roadway, assumed like a 22-foot lane, and said, okay, what is that distance? Okay, so you can actually do the math on that. And so at 30 miles an hour, it's about 325 feet. You need to be able to see down the roadway to be able to turn left or across for a passenger car. A truck, an SUV, or excuse me, a standard single unit, that's 425 feet, a lot further distance. And a tractor trailer may be as many as 510 feet to really get up to speed. Now, we know that doesn't actually occur in a lot of cases, so the vehicles coming in do have to slow down. But again, I just want you to keep these in mind. Now, we can convert, if we know the speed, into time. And that time is just based on the sight distance we calculated, divided by the speed times the conversion factor of 1.47. I usually use 1.5 when I'm doing it in my head, which is how I know that 60 miles an hour is about 90 feet per second. Yeah, it's 88 to be exact, but 90 is close enough. So let's convert that into time and see what happens. Okay, ready? Turns out you can convert those sight distances into seconds. And so you can see for passenger cars at an intersection, you need a little over 7 seconds. Okay, if you rounded it up, you might say 8 seconds. We typically like to say at least 7 seconds as a minimum. Okay, for single unit trucks, it's just under 10 seconds. And for tractor trailers, it's about 12 seconds. So if you went out to an intersection and you stood there, if you could see for 8 seconds, you'd be in pretty good shape. 10 seconds for a big truck and 12 seconds for a tractor trailer. You'd have enough distance. And again, we could argue about whether you round up or round down. And a lot of times we like to say 7 seconds because we'll be a little conservative, but we don't be too crazy, especially for like a driveway. But as an example, let's look at a video together. I want you to count how much time it takes from the time you first see this vehicle. It's a truck, so it's a little bigger than a car, but I want you to count the time it takes. Okay? How many of you got more than 6 seconds? Anybody raise your hand, get more than 6? One person got more than 6, a few of you. Okay? So a few of you, it's right on the margins. It's actually why I chose the site. It's a perfect site. It was right at just under 7 seconds, about 6.5 or so when I timed it. Okay? Now it's a slightly higher vehicle because it's a truck versus a car. But what's cool about these numbers, is they're not dependent upon the speed limit. They're dependent upon the vehicle speed they're actually doing. So if you can't see for that 7 or 8 seconds, you're probably limited. If you thought there were trucks in the area, maybe you need further. And it's a good way to remind yourself of what's safe. So let's do an exercise together. Let's take a roadway. Okay. Clearly there's something in the way. Okay. And let's just do a quick count of vehicles coming by. Here's what's cool. I don't need to know what the speed limit is. I just have to count the number of seconds. Okay. So 7 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds, 4 seconds, and 6 seconds. And by the way, count the first vehicle in a platoon of vehicles because the ones behind are probably being slowed down. In this case, we don't even have 6 seconds. Okay, so probably we need to do something. So in this case, what would be some solutions at this intersection to improve the limited sight distance here? What could we do here? Let's see what y'all come up with. Yep, you could cut back the tree. You could cut the brush. You could clear the obstructions. Yep. Yeah, so there's things you might do. Maybe move that tree back. If someone really wants the tree, at least give a sight triangle. In fact, a lot of town policies actually have a requirement for sight triangles for trees, vegetation, things like that. And that's done to give people the proper sight distance in that sight triangle. And that can be done at the town board or village board level. Now, what nobody mentioned, I'm a little surprised, but nobody mentioned the fact that we're actually looking at a yield sign. Maybe that's a site where we need a stop sign, but let's talk about the traffic control a little bit. Okay. Now, in terms of the traffic control, you could have no traffic control. That's there are more of those than you might think. You could put up a yield sign like we saw in the picture. You could have a stop sign, and you could go all the way up to a traffic signal. And of course, beyond that, you're starting to get into interchanges and stuff like that. Now, let's look at the most common ones here. Okay. Now, when would no control be a good option? When would that actually be a good option to have? No control. There are 3 things I'm looking for here. Let's see if y'all can come up with them. Rural is not necessarily one of them, surprisingly. Low volume is absolutely one. That's absolutely low volume, ample sight distance, and we're looking for one more thing. Relatively slow speeds. And I don't mean absolutely slow, relatively slow. Okay? So it really comes back to that time issue. Do I have that time for vehicles to see each other? In this case, we're probably talking, again, 13, 14 seconds of time. And by the way, this picture here shows a no control intersection. The road goes straight across. There's no signs at all on this intersection. It's fine. It meets all the needs for the people using it. And if you think, well, that's only true in rural areas, in Cortland, New York, I know of intersections going to the hospital even that have no signs and they work just fine because there's plenty of sight distance and the volumes are low enough. Okay. How about yield control? When is yield control a good option? Again, good visibility is the number one thing. Relatively limited traffic. Yeah, especially on the leg that's coming out. Okay. Again, relatively low speed, maybe a little faster than no control. Obviously, you see it on ramps to highways because we're merging traffic, and that can actually be useful. We have only merging traffic. We tend to say, they're only merging if there is something that's not as bad. Okay. And one of the other things we tend to look at is, can the vehicle, as it's approaching the intersection, see the traffic coming in? Because they have to make a decision that if they see traffic, they have to stop. So they need to be able to see that traffic, not just when they're at the intersection, but further back. And there's stuff in our traffic sign handbook and in the state supplement that will actually talk about that. Okay. And there are rules for this, but again, we've only got an hour together. And so there's an example of a yield sign, plenty of sight distance in both directions. How about stop control? When is stop control a good option? And then we're going to remind everybody of what signs actually are there for. You might do a four-way stop. We'll talk about that actually in just a minute. Again, higher volumes, especially if all the roads have similar volumes. Okay. You don't have sight distance. You got to peer down the road as it is. You got to be able to see it. Maybe when there's pedestrians. Remember, traffic control devices are not authorizing what people do. They're authorizing who has the right of way. They're giving people order who's got first, who's second, things like that. Okay. They may or may not actually stop people. Okay. So keep that in mind. They're giving people the traffic control. Okay. And uh, even in a parking lot, you see signs. Now, this sign isn't high enough, but it serves the needs for the parking lot of the grocery store. Okay. So again, be careful when you put signs up. Use them if sight distance is poor, but remember, you may be causing a delay and you may actually get more rear end accidents. And it's not real good at speed control. People turning a two-way into an all-way. Oh, well, thank you. It's a nice head. It's a comfortable one too. Um, it can actually make things problematic. This is a study done out of Michigan. Okay, it's actually a research paper that they have this from. And you can see before they put a four-way stop in, yeah, sure, people were going through the intersection fast. They tended to slow down through it and speed back up, but they were going about 30. Afterwards, they put a stop sign in. The average speed only dropped to just under 10 miles an hour and actually went higher in other places. And what most people don't realize is one of the most dangerous places in terms of pedestrian safety, and make sure my pen color isn't one that's already being used. I'm actually going to switch to green this time. One of the most dangerous places is in this zone where people are changing speeds. As they're changing, accelerating or decelerating, they're actually thinking about other things. And so the danger zone didn't change at all. People are still going fairly fast, and someone may be thinking they're actually going to stop, and a lot of them obviously aren't. Okay? So always stops may not do what you think they're going to do. And then finally, when do we put up signals? When do we put up signals? Fairly high volumes. It's really hard for people to take turns, even if you try to four-way. You need to move traffic, multi-lane, things like that. Okay. And there are warrants for all of these. You don't have to memorize any of this stuff, especially if there's no gaps. Yeah. And of course, you may have situations where signals are really only needed parts of the day. There are signals where they only have them on part of the day, but that can lead to other issues. So it's a balancing act that you have to think about, but make sure you put the signs where people can see them. Okay. Now, let's go look at a couple of the more critical intersection issues, and then we'll do a quick case study or two and get ourselves out of here at the top of the hour. And the three I'm going to focus on are the skewed intersection, the Y intersection, that we know there's still a lot of them, and then we'll just finish our discussion with the roundabout. Um, the highly skewed intersection, there's really two issues with this, okay? Problem number one of the biggest issues is the fact that if you pull up to that intersection, it can be very, very hard to see. In this case, you can see, I think this is actually Jim Markle's photograph when he was working here. And you can see he has to look to see behind him out above the driver's seat through the back mirror or back window. The mirror may not even be able to see this if it's a really highly skewed intersection. Now, we don't typically like to do this, but there's more of these than you might think. What we'd really like to do is have somebody coming in at a 90-degree angle. And so you'll see people do things like this. They'll make the road sort of be a 90-degree. But think about the users of the intersection. If it was only cars, even only cars in this case may not have enough room. Because a good rule of thumb is the perpendicular section needs to be long enough to accommodate the vehicle that's the driving vehicle for design. Okay? So if you had a situation like this, where you've got a roadway that is got tractor trailers, for instance, this one doesn't, but let's say it did, you'd need to think about having a tangent perpendicular section that is long enough to handle that vehicle, and then you'd have to bring your roadway back in to make that work. Okay? Now, I didn't get my widths perfectly there, but you can see much further. And there's not even enough room here for a vehicle, a car, to be perpendicular, much less a tractor trailer. Okay? So keep that in mind. And we really want to try to, if we do that, go 90 degrees, even a few degrees off. We like to say up to 30 degrees, but that can actually lead to problems. We found out the closer to perpendicular, the better off we are for everybody. Okay? The other one is the Y intersection. And we've got a lot of these. We all know they exist. We should slowly try to think about places where we can get to just a straight perpendicular. Because what we've really got here is we've really got three intersections. One is a Y, which doesn't have any priority at the top, and then two highly skewed intersections. And one of the reasons these are so dangerous is imagine now you're a vehicle and you're deciding you're coming in from over here, and you want to go up into the other road. You see a vehicle coming. I can make that. If you make it, okay. But if you don't, we have a crossover crash, a T-bone, high speed at one of the worst possible angles. A lot of the airbags even won't work as well with that. So we should try to eliminate these as much as possible, especially these left highly skewed intersections. Okay. And then, of course, the roundabout. Now I have to ask you this just because I need a number, but I don't care what your opinion is. I just want by hands. I'm not going to look I'm going to hide the names. I just want to see the number. How many of you don't really like roundabouts? Just be honest with me. Again, I won't look at your names. I got your names hidden. I can see the number. And it's okay. I don't care. Okay. Okay. So again, I don't see the names. I really don't care. 6. Okay. So I'm gonna let Jody clear the names, clear the hands. Okay. So about 10% of you don't really like them. And I understand why. Okay. But let me explain to you why we like them. And I'm going to give you 2 reasons why I think some people don't like them at all. Partly, of course, is change. We hate change. But one of the reasons we like roundabouts, the modern roundabout, if done properly, slows vehicles down, reduces the conflict points down to only a total of 8. And they're either diverging or merging. We get rid of all the crossing ones. Now, there are some weird designs called the turbo roundabout. We could do a whole, heck, we do a whole series on roundabouts. But the idea is to reduce the number of conflict points and to make those conflict points less severe. Okay? But it does still mean you have to navigate, and it can be hard to navigate in certain situations. Okay? And of course, it's then hard for someone who is not familiar with it to get through a particular intersection. The other thing is there are still pedestrian conflicts here. Okay? In fact, there are 8 of them. And those, just like they were in the standard intersection, can be pretty severe because people can go a little faster sometimes if you don't design that carefully. You have to think about the pedestrian as part of the initial design. It's really hard to retrofit. In fact, let's go back real quickly and look at the picture, okay, of the roundabout I had. Look carefully. I want you to notice. Does anybody notice the fact they actually have all the crossings and everything for pedestrians, and there are no sidewalks? This is an early roundabout out in Long Island. They wanted to design it for pedestrians, even though there wasn't actually any large volume of pedestrian use. Now, if you do this, by the way, and pedestrians start using it, think where the pedestrians are going to walk. They're probably going to walk along the edge of that pavement, which could lead to its own problems. But think about the conflict points. But if you do want pedestrians, you do need to think about them. And we have slightly different designs when we have to deal with pedestrians. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, in low volume, low speed, you can do some weird things. Like this is a mini roundabout that exists here in Ithaca that actually works pretty well. Okay. But obviously it'd be really hard for tractor trailers to get through this. So you couldn't put this on a road with a lot of tractor trailers. And you have to think about the elimination of parking. You can't allow parking too close to the intersection, which actually is not bad from a sight distance standpoint anyway. But there are quite a few trucks who come here because there's a building on the right that actually is a reuse center, and trucks do come in and out of that quite often. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to take our last 9 minutes together, and I want to do a few case studies. I want you to think about what we've talked about and then ask you what you would do. Now, based on what y'all gave me and where you're from, I'm not going to do all the ones I've got here. I'm just going to do about, we'll see how many we get through, at least 4. Well, we'll start with a simple one, okay? This is a simple intersection, okay? If you're wondering, there are 2 pictures here. The picture on the upper left, I'm standing at the intersection looking towards the curving road to the west. The other picture, I walk down the sidewalk a little bit, and you can see I'm looking south to the intersection, okay? And there we go, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and start the poll, and I'm going to go back to the picture. I want you to just put in a couple of answers. What would you do in this particular case? Okay, I'll let y'all put a couple of answers in, and then we'll open that up. Okay. Okay, let's go see what you guys come up with for answers. Improve signage, maybe add some crosswalks, some offset crosswalks. And again, if you can't, you can throw your answer in the Q&A. That's fine too. Okay. Now let's go back and look at the picture one more time while we're doing this. Okay. Make sure you know there is actually a stop sign there. If you look carefully, you can see the backside of a stop sign. So again, these are very simple, but yeah, maybe some better signage and crosswalks is all you need. Okay. You don't always have to do a lot of fancy stuff. Think about the users, where they're going, what are the origins and destinations. Do you have a lot of people crossing here? It is legally a crosswalk in New York State, but again, may or may not be needed. Okay, but a crosswalk could actually improve the distance here quite a bit. Okay, let's do a different one. Okay, let's do a rural one. Okay, this one is a Y intersection. You can actually see, and if you're wondering where we were when you took the picture, it's right before it breaks off to the Y. So we have a 4-way intersection that's right here. We have a big Y. Let me clear the answers here so you guys don't have that. I'll let you start putting your answers in. I'll go back and bring the picture back up. Okay. I'll give you about 30 seconds to give me some answers. Okay. Let's see what y'all come up with. Signage, maybe a yield sign. Think about a roundabout. Okay. You might have to realign it. Okay. Maybe put some markings on the pavements. Okay. And again, these are all great ideas. I'm a huge fan, especially when it comes to places where we're not sure what to do, is don't go in with a, I'm going to do this. Brainstorm, come up with some cool ideas, and then ask yourself what might or might not work. Okay? Because obviously, let's say you want to put a roundabout in here. Well, your roundabout would probably have to go in a space like this. And so you'd be feeding vehicles in here. You've got a house to worry about. Okay. What's the elevation? And of course, what's the volume of traffic? So again, these are all things to think about when you're coming to a place like this. And there's not always a perfect answer with something of this ilk. Okay. And again, sometimes, by the way, I'm going to skip the next one. I'm just going to show you the picture just to show you. Sometimes we're our own worst enemies. We allow parking in a crosswalk. Probably not a good idea. Let's do a different one though. This is one I think actually is fits with who is in the audience. So I want to do this one. This is actually a pretty problematic one once it decides to wake up. Come on. Well, I'm going to clear the responses anyway since it's not moving. There we go. Okay, so here we have an intersection, okay, and a crosswalk. And if you're wondering, we're in the middle of the edge of the lane looking at the crosswalk. Okay, so it should be open to put in answers. Give me two or three answers here. Yep, we got time to do two more. Perfect. Okay, let's see what y'all came up with. Yeah, why did they put the crossing, a long crossing, in the one of the worst, longest spots? Maybe you go with a mid block because it's a mid block crossing anyway in a lot of ways. Because while it's in an intersection, um, and by the way, it's actually an intersection to a parking lot, but you don't need to know that. But the idea is it acts like a mid block crossing because vehicles going down the roadway, they don't know whether the people coming out of it is an intersection or not. They see it as just a going down the road. Okay. So flashing sign for the pedestrian, move the crosswalk to the other side, which it used to be. If you look carefully at the actual picture, you'll see it. Actually, that's where it used to be. I don't know why they shortened it up. I've never did understand that. You can actually see if you look at the drawing, you can see up here it used to cross beyond the intersection. Okay. Um, ped crossing signs, maybe a rumble strip. Okay. You could maybe even put in a median island or something. I don't know. There's things to think about. Maybe you have to stop traffic if there's a lot of things. Yeah. A yield pedestrian sign in the crosswalk. Yeah. Okay. Okay, we got time for two more. I know which two we're going to do. Let's do this one. This is a really weird one. And if you're wondering the picture, um, I'm standing on a slope. This is here at Cornell. It's the one I showed you earlier. And I promised we'd cover this one anyway. So let's talk about this one. It's a really weird Y intersection. Okay. The main road is the one over here. Let me change the color slightly. I'm going to make the color purple. The main road is this road here with the van on it, and it's the one here. Okay. The minor road comes up here. There's actually a stop sign. There's no stop sign here. Excuse me. Oop, my mistake. Eraser. Um, There's a stop sign here for vehicles turning left, and there's no stop sign for anybody else. And you do have a side road coming in off the side. So let me clear the answers. I know I'm going to make you retype your things in. I apologize. So I'm going to have you put your answers back in. And we have just enough time to show one last thing. Give you 30 seconds here. Okay, see what y'all come up with. Redesign that whole intersection. You know, that's actually not a roundabout might actually fit there. The challenge would be the spacing. You might need to think about the trees. They have pedestrian crosswalks in some, but not all of the locations here. And part of the biggest problem with this intersection, and I've seen some close calls here, is no one's quite sure who's got the right of way. And that's what good signage can do. But how do you not break people's expectations when you get something as odd as this? Okay. It's really hard because that's one of the reasons I'm not a big fan of these Y intersections, whether they're a rural one or an urban one. It's really hard for people to know what to do. Okay. And you don't want to break people's expectations if you can avoid it. Okay. So let's do one last one. I'm not going to have you do an answer for this one, but it's one that I'm way too familiar with, more than I'd like to be. Jeff knows about this. If you're wondering, the pictures here, the one in the upper left is the overhead shot from Google Street View, and there's the crosswalk. Are you seeing any issues there? Actually, I will clear. We got 30 seconds, so I'm gonna clear the responses and let y'all tell me, do you see any safety issues here, and what would you do to make it safer? And then I'll get you out of here with taking 30 seconds of your life. Okay, let's see what y'all came up with. Simplify, crosswalk striping. It is a scary turn radius. They've got this weird roadway that crosses over the interstate. Pedestrians don't touch it at all. And it actually it's not a striped crosswalk. There's a crosswalk measured there. In this particular case, this is the one, if you don't know, I got hit by a car about a month and a half ago at this intersection. Vehicle turned right on red into me. Um, the main issue was the person was focused on turning right on red, looking to her left. She didn't see me at all. And so, how do we get people to notice all of the users? And who are all the users? And is it changed depending on the time of day or what's going on? So these are the kind of things to think about. And so as you're looking at intersections, think about, count the time, make sure everybody's on the same page. Okay. These are all important things to think about. Okay. Uh, you know, little things can make a big, big difference. You know, bulb outs. Someone's already mentioned the idea of flashing signs. They make special ones that will actually legally stop vehicles, though people don't know how to use them as well as maybe they should. I just want you to think about safety at intersections because, as we know, a fairly high percentage of crashes are occurring at our intersections. Okay, with that, I've stolen a minute from you, but I won't steal any more. I won't make you watch me cross the roadway. I do want to remind you of the rest of our webinars once it moves forward. Okay, hopefully we'll see you at all of these webinars, not just the ones that are worth PDHs, because they've all got good information that you can use. And with that, any last questions? Otherwise, I will thank you and hope to see you next week on one of these. Nobody there? Going to give you. Okay. Well, I want to thank Amanda and Jody in the background for helping make sure this all flew well. And everybody have yourself a good week. Stay cool this week. It's going to get to 90 today. And we'll see you next week on our foundational webinars. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.